Hey everyone, it's Nixie, and today I want to talk to you about Yuto Suzuki's Dorinthea Decklist, which got ninth at Worlds, going to an impressive 6-2 in CC and also 5-1 in draft. His decklist is very interesting, where some cards are very similar to my personal list, so I would like to comment on them. But at the same time, he has some wild cards in there, and also lack of some pretty big staple cards. I wish I could interview him personally to dive deeper into his thoughts, but I couldn't get a hold of him. But thankfully, he did a quick deck tech on Tales of Rathe channel on his cards and quickly goes over some thoughts on why he chose some of those cards. This interview, however, was mostly in Japanese, so I don't think a lot of people could understand why he made some of those card choices. And unfortunately, during this recording, I didn't see any subtitles that were in English. But lucky for you, I'm Japanese, so I could understand it and I could, translate for you why he made those card choices and also give you my thoughts on those as well. Before we go into the video, if you haven't seen the actual interview, definitely go check it out. I will leave a link in the description to that video, as well as link to his Fabrary deck list in the description below. Alright, so let's get into it, starting with the equipment. So Yuto has the normal equipment of bracers, courage, providence, and bolters. And he also has AB2, Null Rune Hood, and gloves for the wizard matchup. And he has one Valiant Dynamo for the Dromite matchup, which, is a very good meta call to be running this. Being able to remove the damage counter pretty reliably because you can be swinging at a dragon and then either Dromite or another dragon quite often every turn is gonna be, resetting this Dynamo all the time. So you'll be basically gaining 1 health every turn. So it's very good, big, right? It could also help blocking out those nasty breakpoint attacks like Snatch and Dust Up by using Dynamos and then a 3-block. So it's very good there. The interviewer also asked why he wasn't running Iron Song Versus on top of this equipment. And Yuto says that he doesn't really like how you have to do a payment up front to be able to activate the ability before you even swing. So you have one less resource to play with in the reaction step. Which, I could totally understand. If you're going to want to use that resource for a pump, then you definitely don't want to use that resource up to front pump anything. With versus that won't be active if you don't even hit. So he wants to stay flexible, which makes sense. But what's missing here is something I find very crazy, right? Which is Tunic. No Tunic is so interesting to me because I find Tunic as a key part in Dory's mid-range playstyle. It not only enables your shunts, but also your 1-cost pumps on, let's say, like a Valor or Spoils turn. So, example is, you just play a Valor, pitching a blue, and swing, which leaves you just 1 resource floating. Now, if the opponent blocks, 6, then you need to, use that 1 last resource for a pump if you don't have, let's say, like Iron Song Response, 0-cost pump. So now you have 0 resource left, and let's say you do manage to hit. Great, you hit, you have go again, but you have 0 resources floating, so you can't really swing again unless you have another card in hand, or you have to pop courage. So, Tunic with a resource floating allowed you to just be able to play off of 3 cards, but without that Tunic resource floating, you have to have more cards in hand to be able to swing again. And that's always risky because if you don't end up swinging, you have just cards left stuck in hand and you can't do anything with it. And you just have to suffer IP penalty almost. Yeah, so no Tunic is very interesting. But Yuto explains that he likes to play Dorinthea in a more aggressive playstyle, so doesn't want to block often. So wants to keep those cards in hand, and Tunic doesn't just fit into his game plan. This is polar opposite from how Easton Douglas viewed Dory, who is also a very skilled player, and I got a chance to interview him, and if you haven't seen the video, go check it out, it's really interesting for his thoughts. But yeah, Easton Douglas also, if you didn't know, got 2nd seed at Worlds and ended up at top 4. So congrats to him. Easton explained how he likes to play Dory is in a more mid-range style, where he mainly used Tunic and almost cut Courage completely from his deck list to match his playstyle. So, very interesting. Dory can be played so differently, but still produce results at a high tier level. Yeah, anyway, you can see that Yuto's list is already unique just from this one card that's missing. It's not something I've seen in any other lists. So, now let's go to his main card choices, starting with the main deck. I'm going to be jumping around the cards shown here because I'm going to follow what Yuto showed during his interview. I'm going to start here, and first one we're going to start talking about is Iron Song Pride. Now, Pride has actually seen less and less play from a lot of other Dory players. I'm personally still on 2 because I think it's a really strong card, and Yuto agrees. He likes Pride because opponents never think you'll be getting counter from just one swing, so they're very unprepared for it. He also mentions during the tournament, a lot of people didn't even know about the card, so they had to read it when it was played. So sounds like this card just caught a lot of people off guard. That's good to know. Next one he talks about is Nourishing Emptiness, which is always a nice guaranteed dominate and intellect gain if you don't have any attack action cards. And in his list, this is the only attack action card he has, so the effect is always live. Next is the 2 red Stroke of Foresight that he plays. He feels this card is powerful and I guess undervalued. The ability to fix his hand to get more resources or possibly switch out for a needed pump reaction to continue his pressure is very strong effect. Yuto feels Stroke is more important than Out for Blood, so that's why he runs 2 of it right now. This is an interesting thought because Stroke has been cut from many other Dory lists. The ability to fix hands is indeed strong, but you're relying on top decking a card you need, so it's a high risk, high reward card. But maybe that's something he needs to rely on for his more aggressive style play. Next is the 1 route that he runs just as a finisher card, always a strong card. And speaking of finishers, he also has 2 red overpowers. He mentions how the pumping for 6 usually goes over the blocks and D-reacts, so he has found good use for them. Overpowers I think is always needed as well, but I personally switched out my reds for yellows. Yellow overpowers have been overperforming for me because they can be pitched for resource as well as a +5 that will be able to go over the Sinks and Fate +4 defense D-reacts. So most of the time yellow is good enough to go over those blocks, so that's why I run yellows instead. So maybe he could try that out as well. Next, he talks about the 3 Warriors Valor, which is a front pump, and if it hits, has go again. Always a staple, no surprises there. He has 1 single Out for Blood. Yuto says it's always nice to have this as a 1-of because the +1 trigger effect from the reprise is very useful. Being able to have this as a singing target is always nice because if you know you're going to hit, you do want that +1 on your second swing. I also think, it's very smart of him to just have this as a 1-of because if you play one, the opponent could also expect maybe a second or third one. So they're always going to be playing around something that's not there. So it's just more mind games. So I think it's great that he's running one of this. Next is Puncture, which he runs 3 of. He agrees that it's probably the best reaction we got recently because most people would just overblock for 3. And if those in that 3, if they have armor in it, this will be pumped up to 4. So 1 cost 4 attack is very strong, and most people just overblock for 3. So getting, going over by 1 is always what you want to do with Dory. So this is what he keeps 3 of. Next is Spoils of War, which is standard 3 of. Yuto says that the guaranteed Gorgon is always great to use with twinning, and the copper generation from this cannot be undervalued because using against Jiromai is very nice there because as we know, Kyloria just becomes steal copper instead of draw a card. And also, being able to fix your hand if you have a lot of blues with the copper is also very nice. Next, he talks about Sharpened Steel. He thinks it's one of the strongest buff cards we have since it's a guaranteed 0 cost 3 pump. I think a lot of other Dories feel the same way too, that Sharpen is really strong. I also think it's very strong, but for me, I had to cut it from my list because I prefer more of the hidden information and playing things in the reaction step. So I have, I think, more pumps than using the Sharpened Steel. But you can't really beat 0 cost 3 pump, right? I mean, there's some things that are starting to power creep to 0 cost 4 pump, but yeah, this is just very strong. So if I had space, I would run it as well. Then he talks about Supremacy, which Yuto says is the strongest card in his opinion. Being able to buff the whole churn and draw a card adds a lot of pressure, and this is the card that helps you get your big power churns, where if you combine this with something like Twinning, you're able to push 20-30 points of damage and even get a counter on top of it. And he feels this card is what helps him win games. And yeah, I agree, Supremacy is a very strong card, but at the same time, I think it could be a trap card for the Dory, where you might be tricked into doing something you don't want to do, mainly breaking bolters. Because let's say you play Supremacy, you most of the time will have Go Again, and then if it hits, you have the option of breaking bolters. And let's say you play Supremacy really early, and you don't have Go Again, but you're really, tempted to break it, and you opt to do break it because you're able to go over blocks so the opponent didn't block at all. Then what? You swing again, and if the opponent decides now to block, you're kind of screwed, because if it doesn't hit, you don't get a counter and you lost bolters, which is pretty bad. You really want bolters till late game to have the onboard pressure. So that's why I think it could be a trap card, but it's not like you're not going to run Supremacy. You just have to be smart about it. So I think I see a lot of Dories making this mistake of just breaking bolters too early, and try to be patient, try to time it with some kind of Go Again to add more threats. Yeah, I wouldn't cut it from the list or anything. It's just be careful with it, but it is a very strong card. The last card of the red that's in his main deck is Iron Song Response. So another staple, with it being at 0 cost, pump 3, but Yuto warns that if opponent doesn't block or knows how to block well into Dory, then it can become a liability and hard to use. But during the tournament, it was very useful to him. So it sounds like a lot of people are still blocking him when he got enough counters. So that's good to hear. But yeah, Iron Song Response, it could definitely be a liability if the opponent just decides to not block at all and just becomes a dead card. So if that's the case, if you know you're going to a racing matchup, you might want to cut down to 2 Iron Song Response to keep one as sideboard, and bring in some other card to pressure, like another 1 cost pump or something else. I think this is a great list of red cards here. Next, he's gonna start talking about yellow cards, and he first starts talking about the run-throughs, which he runs 2 of. He mentions how this is the card he wants to see when the opponent says no block on a naked Dawnblade. He plays this and then adds pressure on the second swing, coming in for 5. He also says that, it combines very well with Twinning, and it's just very good. Yeah, not much more to say. I also think Run 3 is a very good card, and I also run only 2 instead of 3. Having 3 could be just too many cards of this run through, and if an opponent just blocks your naked Dawnblade for 3, and you don't have any pumps, then you're kind of stuck, and you don't have anything else to do. So I don't think you need 3. I think 2 is a pretty good number. Then he talks about Glistening Steelblade. So Yuto really likes this card, but he finds it very difficult to use well because of the 1 cost, and it doesn't have a natural pump associated with this. So you're still gonna be most of the time swinging a naked Dawnblade for just 3 damage with Go Again. So if the opponent blocks, it's really hard to have a hit unless you have some tricks up your sleeve. But being able to get a counter each turn is very strong. I don't think you could cut it from your list because of the potential upsides, right? Being able to pressure to have it gain a counter every time it hits, and then maybe 2 counters if it hits 2 times. 1 from the Dawnblade effect and 1 from Glistening. So a total of 3 counters and 1 churn is really big. So he feels that you need to kind of run this card. And yeah, I agree. I think you can't cut it. You really need it in those matchups that a lot of people just try to straight race you, like the Pounder dashes, Dash IO, Fi, previously the Rune Blades too. This was like a powerhouse, so this I think you can't really cut at the moment. Unless your deck is built to be more mid-rangey like Easton Douglas's deck was, where he pretty much cut Glistening. But other than that, if you are planning to race, you need this card. Next is 3 Iron Song Determination. Yuto finds this card just simple and strong, has single digit health. At late game, it can be very good, and when combined with Glistening, it can easily lead to 3 counters. I think that's all true. It's very strong indeed, but the +1 is not that great, especially when opponents have D-reacts and have armor left. So I think previously a lot of people just cut it from their lists, but it's starting to see a resurgence again, especially when people want to be more aggressive. I was on 2, but I think I cut down to 1, but I might go back to 2 again. But it is a good card, but I don't think you need 3 of. But maybe for his list, he really wants to make sure he hits and also keeps those counters, so that's why he runs 3. So that makes sense. So if you're very aggressive, maybe 3 does sound good. Next, he talks about my favorite card, Twinning Blade. Twinning Blade, he says, a lot of people are thinking of cutting down to 1 or 2 of this, but like me, he thinks you need 3. 3 is what you want of this card. This is what a lot of people are going to be checking for, so this is what allows you to have those 3 swing churns with Supremacy. And he says they synergize very well with Courage that he always runs, because it allows you to keep on swinging. I don't see why anyone wouldn't cut this card unless you aren't planning to really swing that many times or trying to keep counters on Dawnblade. I think it's a really strong card as well. I really wish that heavy hitters will give us another way to hit more times with weapons, just like this. Maybe in a 1-cost version that does something similar and give go again would be so amazing. Please LSS, please give us something else. But yeah, I think you need 3 of these. Next is the last yellow, Singing Steel Blade. Yuto finds this card also very strong. Being able to grab any reaction is important, and it helps you get those 3 to 4 swing churns. You can be very flexible with it, because you get to see what your opponent does first with blocks and then determine what to get. So it's very powerful. Being able to maneuver around their blocks is the main selling point to him. But he also says if you rely on this card too much, it'll be bad. Because if the opponent doesn't block and churn and reprise, then you can't really use it. It's only a +1. He was contemplating cutting to 1 to 2 cards, but he still wants to run 3. And I agree, you do want 3 of these, it's always good. Only time I see it being cut, I would say, is doing like something like Iron Song Response, where you put 2 main board and 1 sideboard, just for those aggressive matchups that don't block as often. But you always want to have 3 of these, just in your deck. Just maybe not being played, just keep it on side, one or 2 on the sideboard, depending on the matchup. So that was the yellow cards. Then he's gonna start talking with the blue cards. I think the blue cards has the most interesting things in here. And the first one is the Blade Flash. So Blade Flash is a card that Yuto said a lot of people commented it on. He just thinks it's really strong because he likes the hidden information aspect of it. Being able to decide when to play this after blocks is very strong, and because of that, he likes it more than Precision Press. But he does feel it's like the weakest card from his list. So he might, end up cutting it. Who knows? Yeah, I think Blade Flash, when it first was introduced, I was really high on it too. But eventually I started cutting it from my list, going from 3 to the 2, then 1, then now 0. Just because the 2 block was actually more of a pretty big liability when I was starting to play with it. I had all these 2 blocks, I'm like, man, this sucks. I really wish this was a 3 block. So that's why I changed the Blade Flash for Precision Press. But I could see his thoughts of it, just having more hidden information of just presenting naked Downblade is important for him, to make it look like nothing is gonna happen. Maybe just only he's gonna go tall with just plus pumps instead of forcing another go again. So yeah, I could see this coming back, especially with the resurgence of Warmongers now that Azalea is gonna be popular. Maybe we need more something like Blade Flash to keep people's on their toes. Then he talks about the 3 Warriors Valor blues, which, you know, is just another pump and on hit go again. Very nice. Nothing surprising there. But what is surprising is he has just one Steel Blade Shunt that he runs. Yuto says that his list doesn't want to block at all, and there are times when he has to block or he has to get ready to block, so he has to just have one of these just in case. He doesn't want to play more than one because he finds it awkward if you have 2 shunts in your hand, then you have to pitch to play both of them. I think it's fine that you have more than one shunt. Even it's unlikely you're gonna be playing both of them at the same time. And if you draw both at the same time, he goes play one, then Arsenal the next one for next turn. But I guess he's worried that makes his offensive pressure much lighter than he wants, because it does make your next 2 turn kind of sucky. So maybe that's why he's only opting for one. But without Tunic, this blue shunt is pretty subpar because you always have to pitch to play this. Maybe he could try out Hold the Line, which is a 0 cost D-React. And with like Fies, Katsus, Art of War people running around, Hold the Line will give you a 0 cost 5 block. That's very nice. So maybe that's something he could try. But he doesn't have the 1 damage ping, so maybe he likes that. But very interesting, he's only running one of this. Then he moves on to talking about the most powerful card in your deck, which is Glint. Yuto comments this is so much better than Blade Flash, which everyone agrees, right? Blade Flash is 1 cost, 2 block, and just go again. And this card is a 0 cost, 3 block, go again, and it also has the bonus reprise effect of drawing a card. But he also says he sometimes doesn't play this just to get a go again. If he could sniff out a D-React, he'll pass priority in the reacting step and have the opponent probably play a D-React, hopefully from hand, and then play this to get a chance to draw a card. Which I think is very smart, and I think is a technique a lot of higher caliber Dorinthea players needs to know about and be able to employ. Being able to sniff out D-Rex is a very important aspect of playing Dory. So let's say you attack for 6, like sharpen and swing, and opponent blocks 2 with armor. A lot of people might just play Glint because like, yeah, I could go again. But a more seasoned Dory player will know that this will most likely be a D-React that comes out, hopefully maybe from hand, so you'll wait to play the Glint, have the opponent play the D-React maybe from hand, and then play Glint afterwards to draw a card and maybe go over another D-React or something else. Yeah, I think Glint is a very skill check kind of card. It's not always something you just play immediately. This, I think, is always a 3 of. I don't think any list would cut Glint from their list. Then we move on to just the single out for Blood Blue. Another 1 cost pump, but just for 1. So if he needs to go over by 1, it's very nice. And doesn't really care about reprise too much. But if you do get the effect, I guess it's nice, because if you're gonna hit, you do want your second hit to come in for additional breakpoint. So I guess that's why he's running it. But I wonder if he would rather run Stroke of Foresight Blue. Just like how, you know, he preferred the red strokes over red Alpha Bloods. He could maybe try another stroke here with blue to be able to get the filtering effect. But I don't know. Need to ask him why. Maybe he wants 1 red, 1 blue just for the reprise +1 effect, getting that effect twice. We'll love to know why he opted for this. Very interesting. Then we move on to another staple card of Blue Overpowers. Yeah, I think everyone wants to run 3 of these because of the potential to go up to +4, which goes over a lot of overblocks for 3. So the last single reaction he has is Iron Song Response Blue, just a 0 cost with a reprise condition. Yuto wants just 1 of this, so he could go over perfect blocks. I think 1 is good. I think every list should have at least 1 of this. But recently I moved to 2 because There were a lot of times when I actually wanted one more of this in my deck because I used one earlier blocked with it, and I was like, dang, this is perfect blocked. I just want to go over by one. I know that they might have a D-react, so I don't want to like waste a red Iron Song response. So having this blue one is very nice. And then he quickly talks about the blue hit and runs, just unconditional go again, very good. And then if you hit, then you have 2 resources floating, so you could always pump with bracers and swing again. So yeah, overall just very good. Next is the single energy pot. So Yuto says that since he doesn't block that much, the 0 block doesn't really matter. I know a lot of other Dories have cut it from their list, but he says it's still very good. When you go first, you could just play this if you have it in your hand and set up. And even during mid game, if the opponent blocks a golden attack and overblocks it as well, then you could always play this out and have a nice churn with that. But he wants to keep just 1 of this instead of 2, because if you end up having 2, you could end up drawing at the same time, I guess especially at late game, and then you have a very terrible turn blocking. And you also have a terrible hand to operate with. Yeah, I agree. I think 1 is pretty good. If you're able to play out, just having at least 1 energy pot on the field just makes it really hard for the opponent to guess what you're going to do, because most of the time, opponents could have guessed 1 card in your hand is a 1 cost 3 pump, so they could calculate how much to overblock, how much to expect with their blocks and D-reacts. But with the energy pot, it makes math a bit harder, and you could have like more expensive pumps. You could do a lot of tricky things with it, so it makes it really hard for opponents to block properly. I also like it because for me, I was running my CNC pummel combo, so having an energy pot with the CNC played always threatened the pummel with if I had another card in hand. So because of that, I liked it. But my recent list, again, I cut it because I want to be stronger mid-range to have more blocks. But maybe I'll run it again. We'll see. The last card in the main deck is Eye of Phidia. Yuto mentions how a lot of Dories run Heart of Findo, but he feels that getting 1 or 2 health from Heart of Findo doesn't make a big difference in his games. I'm assuming that's because his games end up much shorter than other standard mid-range Dory games, and where mid-range Dory games you could get maybe 2 to 4 value from your Heart of Findo. And since his games are more aggressive and shorter, you would get only 1 or 2 at max. So it makes sense that he doesn't see Heart of Findo being that beneficial. He also says Eye has a really good synergy with Supremacy to know what you would draw if it hits, and works very well with Glint to know what you're going to be drawing into, as well as Stroke of Foresight that he is running. He feels that the top deck knowledge increases the chance of winning with his playstyle and deck. And again, the 0 block of this doesn't concern him too much because he doesn't block that much. I think Eye is a very interesting choice. Being able to opt is always strong, but pairing it with not only Supremacy, Glint, but for his case, Stroke, is very good. Another way to make sure that you get the card you want. But sometimes, if you don't have those cards, this opt won't really do much other than knowing where you're going to draw next turn. Yeah, it's not as useful, so it could just kind of flop. I guess, we're not like Kano or Azalea or Dash.io that could always do something useful with that information. If we had more cards to use at the top of the deck, then maybe it's more useful. Maybe if you run something more like Unified Decree, then I could see Eye of Phidia being of more use. But even maybe with just Stroke, it's just good enough. But yeah, that was his reasoning for his main deck. Very interesting for sure. Now let's go over his sideboard cards, which he has a lot of 1s and 2s of. Starting with the just 2 CNCs. Yuto mentions the CNC is actually just mainly a popper. He doesn't really use it more than that other than for other matchups like Bravo, Katsu, and Azalea. But yeah, it's very interesting that he just sees it as a popper, because I think CNC is so strong it should be like main deck for everyone. But I guess his deck wants to focus on Dawnblade as much as possible, so drawing a CNC kind of hurts him sometimes, I guess, because he doesn't really want to play it. He'd rather just get like a pump or a go again to threaten more with Dawnblade. So he's like all in on Dawnblade with it, so CNC kind of hinders his plan, so that makes sense, I guess. And since he's running Nourishing Emptiness on main board, he probably doesn't want to compete with Nourishing Effect. So that's why it's just sideboard and just comes in certain matchups. Then he talks about Down and Dirty, which again is just another draw my card. It's probably, not that great. And he says that, he doesn't like it that much. Even when it's in the arsenal, it's okay, right? I wonder why he didn't switch this Down and Dirty for a third copy of CNC, because 2 block, he does agree, is a liability, but maybe he just likes it for the arsenal effect. If for some reason the Dromai plays Lost in Thought to peek at the hand and sees no popper, then they go aggressive with dragons, and he plays Down and Dirty from arsenal to stop their turn. But yeah, I think it's an okay card, but I think he definitely could maybe switch for a third CNC. Next, he talks about the single Oasis Respite he plays, which is for the Wizard matchup. He says that using the Oasis to block out Red Ice Vein is very strong, but he also says that it's really hard to time when to use this card. And I think when he says that, what he means is, since he only has a 1 of this, it's really hard to play at key times or drawing at the right time. So let's say you end up drawing this really early, like turn 1 or 2 against Icelander. Great. You're going to probably arsenal it for the Red Ice Vein. But what happens if the Icelander doesn't play Red Ice Vein for like 4 or 5 turns? You're stuck with this in your arsenal for those 4 or 5 turns unless you just end up playing it. So you're kind of like IP penalizing yourself the whole time. And then if you get this too late after Icelander already plays out their 3 red Ice Veins, it doesn't really do much. Maybe, block something like Merta's Scolding or something. But I think that's what he means. It's kind of hard to time. You can kind of mitigate that by running more of Oasis Respite, which is what I do. I run 2. I think 2 is like a good number because you don't want to be fully defensive against Icelander. Only time you run 3, and like what Yuto says, only time he would run 3 is also if there's a lot of Kanos, because you really want to stop those wildfires. Other than that, he just runs 1. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think it's probably like with Shunt, where without Tunic is very awkward to play Oasis Respite. Maybe not as much against Wizards because you're going to be pitching for stuff anyway on this turn he plays Oasis Respite. But yeah, he only runs 1 of this. His reasoning is very sound. I think he should run 2, but maybe he can't at the moment. Next, he talks about Steelblade Shunt, which he has only 1 of, which I think is very crazy. I thought he would be running at least 3 red Shunts, but he's only running 1. This is just for the Bravo and Azalea matchup. Yuto doesn't want more than 1 because he says, just like the blue Shunts and Oasis, he would hate to see 2 in the same hand, and without Tunic, the Shunts are just awkward. And similar to Oasis, he just feels being able to use this at a key point is what will lead him to victory. The 1 damage from this is very nice, and if the opponent ever gets to 1 and you still have a Shunt left in your deck, you can push lethal. Yeah, I think the 1 is always undervalued, 1 damage that you can do with it. It's a very sneaky way to kill people. But having just run Red Shunt is very wild to me because it's so hard to time when to use it, especially against Bravo, because he's going to have a lot of dominated attacks that really hurt you, like Crippling Crush and now Starstruck. And that's what's the scariest part is, even if you have 3, 4, 5 counters on Dawnblade, if Bravo just holds your hand and then just comes in with the dominated Starstruck, you have no armor and no D-Reacts, you're kind of screwed. You just have to take it, and then you lose all those counters you can't swing. So I think it's very scary to be just running 1 Steelblade Shunt. But maybe he just needs to try to end the game before he runs out of all armor and they have a chance to play out a dominated Crippling or dominated Starstruck. Yeah, I think that game plan is okay when opponent isn't running D-Reacts like Azalea. You could just straight race. But with Bravo that runs with 9+ D-Reacts to extend the game and wear him down, it's going to be kind of hard. To combat this though, to go over those blocks from Bravo and like defensive decks, he is running a 3rd copy of Overpower and Sideboard that he brings in. But he'll only play this into those heavy defensive matchups. Won't play this into something like Icelander. It will be too expensive. Yeah, I agree. I think this having a 3rd copy is nice, but I think, like I said before, this one could be a yellow, or maybe since he's running 3 red overpowers, he could have 2 yellow, 1 red, and bring this 1 red in for those big matchups. Next is Raging Onslaught Yellow, which I think is, a very old school card. He was talking to his friend, and the friend commented how why not try out Yellow Raging Onslaught if he doesn't really want to play Command and Conquers. And Yuto agreed, like, yeah, he doesn't really want to play those Command and Conquers, even though Instant Bravo Azalea, so maybe try out this Raging Onslaught. It seems like he liked it a lot, so I think that's pretty good. I remember running this against Prism as well, back in the OG Prism days when we needed 6 powers to pop those Heralds and such. But I think he could also try out Fendo's Fighting Spirit now, the yellow 6 power, because if you're gonna just be popping things, you could also heal with it with the Fighting Spirit. So I think that might be a better option if this is just gonna be acting as a popper. So maybe that's something that he could try out. Next are 2 yellow hit and runs. Another, go again for Dromai matchup. The yellow pitch is very nice, and like before, if you play this, hit a dragon, you could pump with bracers and come in with the break more for 4, so it's very nice. Then he talks about Yellow Warrior's Valor, which is also for Dromai and actually also for aggro matchups. The front pump of +2 and the conditional go again is very nice in that racing matchup. And he also says that he used to run 3 Yellow Warrior's Valor, but he cut down to 2 yellow hit and runs and 1 Warrior's Valor yellow, because I guess he needed more help in the Dromai side. I am running 2 yellow Warrior's Valor because I need more help in the aggro matchup. But yeah, I'm running 2 yellow Warrior's Valor and 1 yellow hit and run. I think this combo is always good. I think yellow hit and run is always a good card. I think more people should play it. Just very cheap, unconditional go again. It's so strong, especially with something like Twinning Blade. And if he's running Courage too, it's very nice. This is what allows you to get those 3-4 swing turns. And then he has also 1 Precision Press. This is again for Dromai, blue pitch. And with this, he's at 27 go against, so that's enough go against to outlast most Dromais, all their dragons. So it's pretty good. The last card he has is Emboldened Blade, which he brings in for Bravo. Yuto says that he was actually high on this card when he first saw it, but he was saying it was very difficult to use. But he didn't cut it from his list completely because having one is still very good. He explains how if you just pitch it, the opponent will see it and hopefully be wary about arsenaling a D-react like carelessly. So they'll have to be more cautious about doing it. And if they don't see you pitch this and they know you don't have Emboldened Blade, then they'll just put D-reacts all the time in their arsenal, which I think is very smart. So just the mental threat and mental games of this card is just very strong. I personally run 3. I think it's a very strong card, and once you play Dory long enough, you get pretty good at sniffing out D-reacts in Arsenal, just by seeing what they pitch and how they blocked the turn before, and how many D-reacts they have left in their deck. You get pretty good at knowing when they have a D-react, so that's why I run 3. But I think everyone should at least run 1 because of Yuto's reasoning. Alright, so that was Yuto Suzuki's list. It's certainly a very interesting list, right? It's a Dawnblade focused and very aggressive list. It sacrificed defensive capabilities for more offensive power and pressure. And the sideboard here looks mainly just for Dromai and some Bravo, but mostly Dromai. What surprised me the most out of this deck though is the lack of D-reacts. Because, I know he sacrificed it, but he's not even running any sinks or fates with those zero cost D-reacts that anyone would really run, even 5. So that was very surprising. He only has 3 D-reacts really, which is the blue shunt, red shunt, and 1 red oasis. They all cost 1, so that means that he has to pitch every time for these guys. So very interesting. I think maybe he could try out 2 sinks. I want to ask him why he didn't try out 2 red sinks and then 1 Oasis or something like that. Maybe he just wants the ping damage from the shunts. Also have 1 tall shunt for the Bravo matchup. Would love to know his reasoning. I also love to know how he plays against the Wizard matchup. Like Icelander, he goes AB2. But it sounds like he doesn't really want to block, so I wonder if he doesn't really pitch for things too. And if that's the case, then maybe he just needs AB1 and just race. That's what I do. I just go with AB1 and bring in 1 more Oasis Respite. Would love to know what he thinks about that matchup and how he plays it. Let's see. This list, I think, it was very strong in the meta that he played at. Other than, again, the Bravo and Katsu matchup, I think it would definitely struggle into defensive decks. And I think that's always been the case with super aggressive Dory decks. They just loses out into super defensive decks. Other than, like, what Phi would be like into Ultim. Just because in Phi, even if you get blocked out, you just keep on going. With Dory, if you get blocked out, your turn just ends. So, and you lose all your pressure from your Dawnblade counter. So it's very hard to just be super aggressive into very defensive decks. And I think that's what we saw on stream when he played against the Katsu. The Katsu was a very defensive Katsu with running a lot of D-reacts, and I think he was running Oasis as well. So he struggled there, and I think I heard he played against Michael Hamilton's Bravo on the second match, where he got his loss. I heard that was a rough matchup too for him. But he did end up beating a Bravo later on, so maybe he needs to just be able to pilot extra hard and be very careful to not overcommit or something in those matchups. But I would love to hear his thought about those more grindy matchups, how he deals with it, and how this list does in his opinion. Yeah, I guess that's it for now. This was his list, and I would love to chat with him more if I get the chance. But for now, congrats to Yuto, and I hope to see more of his lists in the future and how his list evolves with heavy hitters coming out. Alright, that's it for now. Thanks for watching everyone, and see you all next time.